I'd like to call the meeting to order. We will say the memorare together. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Can I have someone move to approve the agenda? Paul, seconded by Arlene. Discussion? Questions? All in favor? Any opposed? I see no one opposed. So the agenda is carried. Can I have someone move the approval of the minutes? Moved by Trustee Michael, seconded by Trustee Trites. Questions about the minutes? Seeing none, I call the vote. All in favor? Anyone opposed? I see no one opposed to the minutes, so that carries unanimously. Can I have a mover for action item 3.1, please? Moved by Trustee Quinn, seconded by Trustee Marai. Discussion, or may I have Mr. O'Hara, please?
Thank you, and through you. There is a requirement for the board to review its policy on occupational health and safety on an annual basis, and that requirement falls under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So staff have reviewed the policy and is recommending no changes for the 2017-18 year. Thank you.
Okay, so we're just really doing a routine look at this policy, and staff sees no changes to recommend. So any discussion, questions? Trustee Carbella.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, is this policy working so people are reporting?
Through the chair, yes. We do have very sophisticated health and safety committees, and we certainly report accidents, and our administrators are all trained as certified employer reps at each location. So,
Trustee Quinn, did you have a question?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering who, and you could tell us a bit about who our board health and safety officer is, because I don't think I've had the pleasure. And do we see reports on health and safety, and what is the trend? Are we up or down in reports of incidents, accidents, and safety? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you. Our health and safety officer is Kim George, and so she actually wears two hats. She deals with the WSIB claims and injuries, as well as supporting the local health and safety committees at each of our school locations. In terms of trends, we can certainly go and bring a report to you with those details. Last year was a good year for us, and we actually, I don't have our finance person here, but we actually did receive a rebate from the government with respect to our trends. So we actually did have a good year with respect to workplace injuries last year. Thank you.
Would the Treasurer like to add to that?
I'm down here. Yes, we do get audited annually, and based on our trends, we get a rebate if we are below. And the last 2 years have been, so we were lower and lower in terms of incidents, so that's a good thing, and we get a higher and higher rebate.
Okay.
So could we see one of the more recent reports on WSIB in future meeting, please?
Can we do that?
Again, through you, I'm not certain in terms of what that would look like. The WSIB reports that we receive actually have names attached to it. We could probably put together a summary of the types of injuries that are occurring and provide that kind of report. But we couldn't provide you with individual names and thank you.
Trustee Quinn?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Then perhaps maybe Ms. George could attend one of our meetings and just give us a verbal update on what she sees amongst the different groups that she speaks to.
Certainly, we can do that.
Trustee Marai?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the health side of things, I assume the flu has a significant impact on the number of days that individuals are actually at work. And I'm wondering, there's a lot of regional data now on flu. Are we tracking that internally, and are we using that data to try to decrease, I guess, the cases of the flu or the spread of it in our schools, to encourage people with communication to say, you should stay at home in times like that?
Who can handle that? Director Doss?
Mr. Chair, when employees phone in sick, they don't tell us it's the flu. Children, if there is a high incidence, usually if the parents say, oh, it's the flu, it reaches a certain point, I forget the percentage, Tim, where we would have to, 10% of the population at the school, if the parents report that their child has the flu, we report it to the health unit, so they know if it's an epidemic or what needs to be put in place. So that's the numbers.
And through you, Mr. Chair, we certainly at the school, especially during the high seasons, we certainly try to educate our students in terms of proper hygiene to make sure that can minimize flu. And in newsletters, we also kind of put that out to parents that if your child is sick, that it's best to stay at home until they're healthy to do so.
Any other questions or comments about occupational health and safety? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor of putting this to the September 19th board meeting for approval? Do I see anyone opposed? I see no one opposed, so that carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, can I have a mover for item 3.2, employee assault policy? A mover, Trustee Quinn, and seconded by Trustee Marai. Mr. O'Hara, can you give us some background, please, on 3.2?
Thank you, and through you, again, this is another one of those policies that we're required to review on an annual basis under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Staff have reviewed the employee assault policy and are recommending no changes, so it's presented to you for approval.
Thank you. Any discussion, questions? Trustee Carabella?
Thank you. I just found a typo. In the definitions section, the last sentence, it says at attempt by a teacher, so I think it should be any attempt by a teacher. Last sentence of the definition, that's all.
Thank you. We'll make that adjustment.
And Trustee Carabella?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I just had a note here as I was reading it. So, does the union have a role here, or what role does the union play in this?
If there was a employee assault, that we certainly would be informing the union that something has happened to one of their members, and certainly the union does have a right to represent their members and express concerns and put us to the test in terms of what are we doing to try to prevent reoccurrences and to protect the worker at the location.
Trustee Quinn.
Follow up on that. What about staff-on-staff assault as opposed to students? Or I think it doesn't necessarily cover that part versus someone coming from outside of the school staff and assaulted, or a student?
Again, through the chair, we have a number of policies in place, including the harassment policy, which is the next one, which does talk about that in some detail. We also have a workplace violence policy, which is coming up, which really deals specifically with that. So we're getting to those items. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Trustee Quinn?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So then we look at Section F and the requirements. If it is a employee-on-employee issue, is the principal required to alert the police to start an investigation, or do they call union staff first, or internal staff before they call the police? Because it would be where a person other than a student at the school is committing the assault. If it's another board employee, what is the role there? Perhaps it's covered in this, but I think it's something left unsaid here.
Again, through the chair, any issue that involved an employee, we would have to look at the situation and on a case-by-case basis and see exactly what has happened and what has transpired. It wouldn't necessarily be that certainly the principal would be calling the union. The principal would be calling the family and school superintendent or HR to get some advice. In very serious situations of assault, yes, the person who was assaulted or another employee or the principal may choose to certainly contact the police. But I do think it would really depend on what you're talking about. Are we talking about a situation where two teachers bumped into each other in the playground and one is taking offense to that and the other one's saying, I just stumbled, which has happened, versus right.
Through you, Mr. Chair, for clarification then. So you cited the case of staff bumping into each other, but if it was a parent who bumped into a teacher, the principal shall alert the police to investigate. So I'm wondering if there is room here for language that indicates that this policy does not relate to staff, assaulting staff, and that's seen in the workplace violence policy as opposed to this one.
Superintendent Overholt?
Through you, Mr. Chair. In reading F, the first sentence talks about those who are not a student at school, but the second part of it just is a general statement if it's an adult. So it doesn't state whether it's an employee or a non-employee. If it is an adult, then if the principal deems that it's an assault, they would contact the police. So I don't think they differentiate when the second line of that is whether it's an employee or a non-employee. It just says if it's perpetrated by an adult, then they would call the police if they feel as though it was an assault.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the principal then is required to report an assault from one employee to another if it's a serious nature in terms of bodily harm as defined above.
Superintendent O'Hara, did you have anything to add? Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other comments or questions or concerns? Otherwise, I'll call a vote. All in favor of sending this to September 19th board meeting? Do I see anyone opposed? I see no one opposed, so that carries unanimous. Thank you. Item 3.3, can I have a mover for harassment policy? Trustee Ian Tomasi? Seconded by Trustee Michael. Discussion, Superintendent O'Hara.
Thank you, and through you. This is a report that's up for review. We have taken a look at it, and again, different set of lens. Certainly Samita spent some time looking at this. under the Occupational Health and Safety Act changes, or Bill 168, felt that we should be clarifying the definition of harassment, to make it very clear that we are talking about it including workplace sexual harassment. The current policy does deal with sexual harassment in detail, but there is a requirement to ensure that the harassment definition does include workplace sexual harassment, so we've added in those words. And other than that, it's status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Discussion? Trustee Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not on the policy itself, but on how often we have to invoke this policy. I'm wondering, what are the cases of harassment and the incidences, please?
Thank you, and through the chair, last year we had one case, and certainly we worked with those two individuals and their union and was able to resolve it. I wouldn't say that we have a lot of formal complaints that come forward. Usually it would be one or two a year, and we, for the most part, were able to resolve them without having to get to the point of writing a formal recommendation to the director.
Trustee Mariah, and then Trustee Rabenda.
Mr. Chair, my question is in regards to the specific items cited in the purpose. So, I'm not sure if it's good policy ever to specifically cite the areas that we are discussing when it includes even further ones that are mentioned under the Human Rights Code. So since 1991, it's expanded significantly. And not only that, so either we include them all or we don't include them at all, I would think makes a lot of sense. And then number two, and this may go to the superintendent's point, but we then go into like very specific examples only on some of them. So from a broader policy perspective, I think we either include them all or just cite them under the Human Rights Code. And then I'd like to hear staff's opinion on, do we need to actually cite specific examples because maybe they are the ones that are dealt with on a more regular basis.
Thank you, and through you, certainly we can't contract out of the Human Rights Code, and so what we have put here is essentially examples, and yes, the purpose clause does go and talk about any identified grounds within the Human Rights Code, and certainly that list continues to evolve, and it has been expanded, as you've indicated, over the last few years. There is a requirement that we specifically talk about workplace harassment and sexual harassment, and those are kind of key hotspots, so there is a purpose for that. We also educate our staff on, our workplace is a place where it has to be free from sexual harassment, and so that is a policy and a procedure that is highlighted to staff. Thank you.
Trustee Rabenda.
Excuse me, Diane, can you put your microphone on?
Related to Trustee Mariah's comments, I noticed that again, it does mention sexual harassment and the racial, ethno-cultural harassment specifically, and maybe that's because Joe said they have to do that. There isn't anything about gender harassment or about harassment about physical appearance or cultural in that regard. It's very specifically going to the racial and the ethno-cultural and the sexual, but I'm not seeing anything about other issues unless it's just in the Ontario Human Rights Code, and that's enough, so I'm assuming it's the same answer to Paul's.
Again, through the chair, that would be the same answer. At the end of the day, we could have a complaint on family status, for example. That would be a prohibited ground, and we would have to look into it and treat it seriously. Thank you.
Superintendent Overholt.
Just a suggestion to help in regards to that. Would it be, if you reword it in a way free from harassments related to any grounds identified on the Human Rights Codes as the one, and then we can put examples in terms of some that are listed there. Would that kind of suffice to saying that obviously anything under human rights is what we address? Just a suggestion.
So what is the change in wording that you want to add? Can you just restate that?
The suggested would be to ensure the environment of the Halton Catholic District School Board in which its employees work and its students learn is free of harassment related to any grounds identified within the Human Rights Code, and then we can also put examples within after that. Just making sure that would work through Superintendent Ira.
Yeah, that's fine. It's really kind of just rewording the same thing, and if we want to say examples and just list 2 or 3 prohibited grounds, I'm fine with that, or not list them at all, but you know, there was some reason why I think those were originally plucked, but you're going back to 1991, so they were probably the hot spots, and we've been sort of still dealing generally with those hot spots. Thanks.
Trustee Quinn.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps just a comment or a question about the racial, ethno-cultural harassment usually involves a negative attitude. So that seems very broad, to have a negative attitude as something that would be considered harassment. It's hard to judge or to police someone's attitude. I'm not sure what that would mean to equate harassment with someone's attitude, and how would we be able to defend yourself for someone's impression of your attitude?
Again, through the chair, it does talk about written and verbal, and so like many things, you have to look at intent, what was said, and the context of what was said. So, for example, I'll give you an example of one issue that I had dealt with, where we had 2 employees that were both Portuguese descent. One was very critical of the Portuguese government, and the other one took offense to that and filed a harassment complaint. Now, it's not harassment for 2 people of the same culture to disagree, and one can bash one, and one cannot. It might have been a different issue if perhaps one of them was an Irish descent that was criticizing the Portuguese, right? Then you would have a situation. And so, you know, some of these things are subtle, and you have to kind of weigh into them and see whether in fact there's an issue or not. Thank you.
Trustee Quinn.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I hope we wouldn't call harassment criticism. Criticism and harassment are 2 different things. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But if we're looking at vexatious, what was the term? Vexatious treatment, different than having critical opinions of or not sharing the same opinions, that can lead to those types of
Right.
harassment allegations.
Yes, and again, there is some more detailed definition in the policy, and you are talking about, like, for example, the examples are talking about, you know, demeaning comments, jokes, remarks. So people are in writing or verbally putting down other people's heritage. And I said it's okay for 2 Irishmen to be bashing each other. It's not to, and what I mean by bashing each other, let me qualify that. Sorry, not physically, but to criticize, you know, the old country. It's not all right for you know, someone to go and criticize someone else's culture and be mean-spirited about it.
So how do we feel about this policy now? Any other questions, comments, or discussions? Otherwise, I'll call a vote with the minor changes that Superintendent Overholt brought up and the red words on page 104. All in favor of sending this to September 19th? Do I see anyone opposed? I see one opposed. Trustee Quinn is opposed. That carries. Can I have a mover for item 3.4, workplace violence? Moved by Trustee Trites, seconded by Trustee Rabenda. Questions, discussion? Or may I have Superintendent O'Hara, please, for some background?
Thank you, and through you. Again, the workplace violence policy is a policy that needs to be reviewed on an annual basis. Staff have done that, and there's no recommendation to make any changes to the existing policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any discussions? There's a theme, I think. Trustee Marai, did you have? No. Okay. Yeah, there is a theme. Anyone? Trustee Carabella.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I just wondered, because it refers to Bill 168, I wonder if it would be useful to add that link to that bill. So who's ever looking up this policy can click very easily and find Bill 168 to further their education.
Director Dawson, that's fine.
Yep. Yeah. I just wanted to comment on that. So the Bill 168, all of it, the changes have actually been incorporated into the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So what one would be looking at would be the Occupational Health and Safety Act. That would be the piece of legislation that Bill 168 really was an omnibus bill that had a lot of changes that incorporated the requirement to do certain things, but it's actually the Occupational Health and Safety Act that would have the document and all the definitions. Thank you.
Director Dawson?
So to you, Mr. Chair, we can put a link to that under where it says Occupational Health and Safety Act if you wish.
Anyone else? Okay, so I'll call a vote for sending policy 3-15 to the September 19th board meeting. All in favor? Anyone opposed? I see no one opposed. That carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 3.5, policy I-38, school board trustee election guidelines. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Trustee Rabenda, seconded by Trustee Trites. Director Dawson.
To you, Mr. Chair. The school board election or trustee election guidelines were first created in September 2013. And with the current realities of the population trends in Halton region, we wanted to include in this policy the criterion determination on the distribution of trustee representation. You will find attached Ontario Regulation 412/00, which outlines the definitions of the population electoral group, and also what ADE and the number of trustees according to the regulation that our district is entitled to, which is 9. Section 4 actually of Regulation 412 provides instructions for how school boards should calculate geographic representation of trustees, and we've also included a graph in there as well. By March 31st, our board is required of an election year to determine and pass a board resolution for trustee distribution, and we communicate that to the Minister of Education, the school board education clerks for all municipalities, and secretaries of every other board in the jurisdiction. You have in Appendix B a projected ratepayer population distribution for the board and the projected ratepayer population distribution for each geographic municipal region, and the calculated trustee representation by municipality. What we're hoping is we seek, this is an action item tonight, to seek stakeholder feedback on any changes trustees wish to make to this policy. So I leave it in your hands, Mr. Chair.
Questions? Trustee Marai.
I have a couple questions. Just to begin, when did the director receive the population of electoral group report from the municipal, from MPAC? Yeah, when was the report provided to you?
I'm not sure, but Fred would have got those numbers in order to make this table for us.
So because the
2016.
So traditionally what happens is, and this is why it's entrenched in provincial regulation and law, not in any board's policy, is because we're already required by law to do this. So I know that the director wasn't around when we originally passed this policy, but the intent of the policy back in 2013 was to provide guidelines to candidates and to trustees as to what you could and could not do during an election cycle. And the main reason was we wanted to ensure that there weren't any advantages to being an incumbent and have a level playing field across the board. So I guess I have, it's not that I have necessarily issues with what's written in the report. I don't know why it's in this policy, because it really doesn't have to do with this policy. We're required by law to do it anyway, so this is going to come about in January, February, which we need to pass. And I guess my third and final concern is the fact that I guess you picked and chose what you wanted to put in from the Ontario regulation. So although I appreciate the comments made in it, and I frankly agree with much of it, I don't think we should be necessarily passing a policy that isn't congruent with the original version, and something that we're going to, as a group, have to do by law in a couple months.
Anyone else? Trustee Michael.
In looking at the numbers, like for Oakville, for example, I was quite frankly taken aback when I saw that Oakville population has decreased 6%. And I know it's just media, but I thought it was still rising. I just wanted to know where those figures came from.
You, Mr. Chair. All of this was prepared by Fred. I should have asked him to come tonight because he's the one that crunches the MPAC numbers.
Trustee Marai, and then Trustee Carabell.
Just on that point, traditionally in past years we've had a much broader report that showed the breakdown of the numbers, and also the student population to trustee, because I think it's a reasonable conversation we need to have at some point this year. But I also don't think that specific question on distribution of trustees has anything to do with this specific policy. It's a conversation we have to have, just not in here. So like I'm happy to make motions to make changes to what's been put forward to us, but I don't want to do it unilaterally. I want to hear what other people have to say.
Did the Treasurer have some feedback before I move to Trustees Carabella and Rabenta?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on the previous question from Trustee Michael, it relates to the ratepayer population, so the Catholic ratepayer population, which the demographics change from time to time. I don't have all the details. Unfortunately, Fred could not be here tonight, but that's when it says population, it's not just the town of Oakville population, is the ratepayer for our district.
Trustee Carabella.
I was just going to say the same thing as Trustee Michael, that we hear about the growth in North Oakville, north of Dundas. So I just wanted to say that. I was surprised.
Trustee Rabenda.
I think it's very obvious what this is and what this is not. And the growth in Milton is phenomenal, and it's not decreasing anytime soon. In fact, they keep telling us we haven't seen anything yet. I think that Milton is entitled to another trustee, and I think that we've all known that for a while, even with the last time that we revisited this in 2013. I think it was obvious. We may not want to go there. Some of us may not want to go there, but I think we all know what's happening.
Trustee Iantomasi.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just wanting to the Treasurer. I'm assuming these numbers are from before. I guess my question is do you perceive that these numbers are going to change much, given that we are going into an election year and more people will be registering as Catholic ratepayers or not? So I just don't, I mean, it's probably very close, but also, yeah, I looked at the drop and I thought, I don't know how this makes sense, because I don't know where the drop would be happening unless it's in the south part of Halton, so I was just kind of curious as to whether those numbers might change significantly, notwithstanding where we need our trustees or don't.
Superintendent Nagoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's hard to say how much they will change. They're based on the latest data that we do have. Every month we get some updates, but they're not the yearly ones that we expect in January, February, I believe. As soon as we have those numbers, we do provide them to the board, and they will give you a better idea, and will give you the actual depiction of the distribution, both in terms of ratepayers and students in our schools.
And have these numbers changed since the report we got earlier this year? And just to be clear, going back to Trustee Marai's point, the regulation stands as a regulation. The legal requirement is to pass a resolution by March. There is no prescription there is no legal prescription as to what the resolution says. That's correct?
Sorry, Helena. It's just that, like, I don't think anyone would disagree with that, like, anything in here. Like you say, the principle of representation by population. Like, I don't know anyone around this table who would, but you picked one out of 4 different items that talks about municipalities with low populations to receive reasonable representation. Number 4.2, evidence of historic, traditional, or geographic communities should be taken into account. There's a lot of areas that may have no impact on the decision, based on a lot of good information that Trustee Rabenda has said, and that we've seen with the growth in Milton. But this, like, the actual numbers we have here is kind of a distraction to the actual policy, because if you wanted us to vote on the distribution today, you should have put the distribution in front of us, not had this policy in front of us. That's how I see it.
Trustee Iantomasi.
Through you, Mr. Chair. As I recall, the last time this sort of thing was brought before us, and I don't know whether this is sort of a mixture, if you will, of the last time, but this is different than what we saw when we went through this process the last time. I believe it was broken down by how the Oakville trustees wanted to vote, like municipally, how we wanted to be broken down. We were going at large or by ward, and I don't know whether that's supposed to be part of this package or not, or whether that's going to come back separately at some point. So I guess I'm wondering, is this part of a process, or are we starting with this and then doing the other things, or or should we send this whole thing back, have it repackaged so that we're looking at the thing in its totality? I'm not trying to negate anything that Trustee Rabenda is saying. I certainly think that we need better representation in the north, absolutely. But how we get there, I think, from what I'm hearing, maybe we need something that's a little clearer, sort of municipal area by municipal area, and then putting it all together and us deciding, you know, as a group, if we're going to vote someone out of Oakville up into Milton.
This is not the formal motion that is transmitted to the region for the purposes of the election. This is part of a process, but the director, correct me if I'm wrong. Diane, did you have a...
You've heard me talk about this, you've heard me talk about it tonight, and you've heard me talk about it before. This is a Catholic board. Milton has the numbers. Milton probably should have had a change last time, and it didn't get the change last time. This board voted it down. In fact, I think there were 3 people. It was 6 against and 3 for. And it's coming back, and Milton continues to grow, and they're entitled to 2 trustees.
Any further discussion? Trustee Michael.
I'm just going to echo everyone's sentiments on this side of the table anyway. And I think that Arlene's, everything should be moved, that we send it all back and it be separated and brought to us according to what is to be done. In those words.
We have a point of order, we have a
motion on the table. The motion is to send this out for stakeholder consultation, to amend the policy by adding the text of the regulation, which regulation stands whether it's part of the policy or not, as Trustee Marai has been pointing out. So this is part of a process. So if this motion passes, it goes out for stakeholder consultation. If it is defeated, the motion that is required by law to pass, to determine or to declare our allocation and intentions for the election, for the next election, will be coming up by the deadline prescribed in the regulation. Around January. Trustee Quinn? No, I asked you. I thought you had a question.
So you call the vote, Mr. Chair?
Okay.
Just back to the actual. If we want this part of the policy, then let's add it to the policy. I just don't see. I just don't see what addition. This is not to suggest that any region should not receive due representation. We can deal with that next meeting. We should deal with it quickly, frankly. But I don't think any of us have really discussed if we want this specific item in this policy or not. I tend to think it's redundant, but maybe there's a
Nobody else has anything to say?
Okay.
Anyone else? Otherwise, I'll call the vote. All in favor? 1, 2, 3. Opposed? Trustee Quinn, Trustee Trites, Trustee Carabella, Trustee Michael, and Trustee Marai. All opposed. So that motion fails.
Just to be clear, Mr. Chair, this policy, the old one, is still on the books, right? Okay.
Trustee
Just
Yatamasi?
for clarification, we will still be getting those other reports. Can we, later?
Right, oh yeah, we're still obliged to pass that resolution. That's required by that regulation. We're obliged to pass that by March 1st, right? Is it March 1st? March 31st.
Okay. Just wanted to be sure.
Mr. Chair, I think it's reasonable for the body to know when that should be expected, so that we can deal with those important issues.
Director Dawson? You say it should come forward in January or February? Trustee Quinn.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Now, because this is, it potentially would change the representation of Oakville or Burlington, or perhaps or Halton Hills, that there be sufficient time for debate amongst this table and not brought close to the date.
Mr. Chair, that's why I suggested January, because if it's due March 31st, you need some time to talk about it in 2 sets of reports before you vote on it.
I'd hope to see a report that details both sides of the argument.
Why are we waiting until January? Why don't we bring it forward? Let's bring it forward sooner. No, if there's concern about the issue. It's clearly a prominent one. Let's do it sooner rather than later.
Well, let's take that offline and move on, because we have already voted on the matter for tonight. Okay, can I have a mover for item 3.6, policy I-44, strategic planning policy? A mover, Trustee Quinn, seconded by Trustee Trice. Superintendent Nagoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The policy before you is recommends the approval and first reading for the strategic planning policy I-44. It contains minor changes that are in track changes as received from some of the feedback from trustees since our June meeting. And as Appendix A, it provides a chart that depicts the stages in developing the strategic plan and the points of approval from trustees. Thank you.
Thank you. From the Treasurer, so comments, questions, discussion. Trustee Quinn.
Just to comment on the application and scope of the policy. I don't know that we have the authority to bind community partners and other stakeholders in our policies. So that's why I wonder about the policy applying to anyone else outside of our purview. So I don't know how our policies can be said to apply to anyone who's not a student or an employee of the board.
Anyone like to handle that one comment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just, it is only those involved in the development and implementation, so I'm just trying to think of stakeholders such as our parish representatives that could be part of this, that they would be certainly part of the implementation pieces. So those are the type of individuals that we'd be looking at. Obviously, we're not going to feel as though somebody who is not part of the process, we're going to force that, but it's only those who are involved in the implementation or the development of that.
Anyone else? Treasurer?
As Superintendent Overholt mentioned, a lot of our policies state various stakeholder groups in the scope to the extent that it's applicable to them. If they do, if it involves any actions in regard to that particular policy or procedure, they have to abide by the board's policies and procedures. That is not to say that all community partners or other stakeholders are required to respond to our surveys and data gathering. It's just those who do want to get involved or are part of certain subcommittees for information gathering would abide by the policy.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Trustee Quinn.
Looking at the, I'm not sure if this is an appendix, what this, Appendix A, and Phase 3, I think we're missing an important, perhaps blue diamond, which would be a decision made through board resolution, would be something called a plan of action. It looks like we are establishing priorities and goals at the top of Phase 3, and then we're developing evaluation criteria, and then we have a draft plan, but there's no actual plan envisioned here in this. So I think I would recommend we add a blue diamond underneath analyze findings, and then we create a plan of action that would encompass the strategic plan, and then we would create, the director would create the evaluation framework, and then we'd approve that plan. So I think we need to add board approve a plan of action.
Thank you. Can that be incorporated into the draft at this point, or would you like an amendment to be moved?
We'll add a diamond with the board resolution as per the Phase 3 in the policy. So we'll be consistent with what is in the policy currently and edit the flow chart.
Trustee Carabella.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, because I think that, did we ever see an action plan for the strategic plan we did? Like an action items? Okay.
Director Dawson, did you want to comment?
Yes, and you're going to see it again next week.
Okay, so this is going to go out, this is going to follow operating policy number 1 for new policies. It'll go out for first reading, come back to the board for approval and amendments. Then it will go out second and third readings before it's finalized. So hopefully, I think that, I think staff's done a good job at making a first cut at this policy. But I think that, like I've said before, that we've all been through the strategic planning process once. So whatever you saw during that process or didn't see, that now's the time to incorporate it into a policy. Okay, so I'll call a vote on sending this to, unless there are further questions or discussion. Seeing none, we'll send this to the September 19th board meeting for approval at first reading. All in favor? Anyone opposed? I see no one opposed, so that carries. Thank you. Okay, I see no discussion items. Information items. Item 5.1, Superintendent O'Hara, work complaints resolution process.
Thank you, and through you, the attendance support program procedure is before you. I believe it was requested as information. We had certainly had a lot of discussion last year. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm dealing with the wrong one. Sorry. The complaints resolution process. We did go and review this particular procedure and made a couple of minor changes to it. There is a requirement that we provide the results of the investigation in writing to both individuals, the complainant and the respondent. So we've included those words in the procedure. So again, the addition is only in writing in 2 spots, number 7 and number 8.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent O'Hara. Any comments, questions? Trustee Carabella.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. On page 2 of 6, it talks about the emergency, for reasons of emergency, and about sudden illness or death. And I'm wondering, do we keep data on all that? And do we get a lot of emergencies? I don't know now, I just made it.
Are you referring to the,
I didn't make a good note.
I think you're referring to the attendance support program, which I apologize, I was on the wrong page and then I switched back to the correct item.
Okay.
So we're talking about the complaint resolution process, workplace harassment.
On page 44 of our package.
Page 43, 44 to 46 in your package, in the printed package.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Any comments or discussion on complaints resolution? This is to support the workplace harassment. Seeing none, okay, we'll move on to item 5.2, which we've had a preamble for. Attendance Support Program, Superintendent O'Hara.
Thank you, and through you, again, this was requested certainly to be brought before you. We did have a lot of conversations on the attendance support procedure last year. This is the procedure that goes with it. Staff isn't recommending any changes to this particular procedure. It certainly was developed in consultation with the board's legal counsel. It has been tested in another number of arbitrations in front of some high-level arbitrators, Brian Sheehan and Brian Keller, who's certainly supported our approach, and so it is somewhat bulletproof. So we are recommending that it be approved as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent O'Hara. So this is the administrative policy that supports operating policy 3-17, attendance support program. Any comments, questions? I think somebody's phone might be near a microphone that's on. It's not mine. Maybe go airplane mode. Okay, so any comments or questions on 5.2? Trustee Carabella.
Okay, so thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So I just found it. It's on that first bullet on page 2 of 6. It just says, unless the matter is an emergency which entitles the employee to claim emergency leave. So just to familiarize myself, we do keep data on all the reasons why employees ask for time off, and then do we get a lot of those emergencies?
Thank you, and through the chair, we do have a program, Smart Find Express, and we require all of our employees to code in absences, and there are specific reason codes there. Emergency leaves is one of them, and I would say that certainly that is a code that does get used. It could be used because an employee's in a car accident on the way to work. It could be used because there's a very sick child or someone is being rushed to the hospital. So we do get those. So certainly they're not as frequent as, say, for example, personal illness or medical dental, but emergencies do happen amongst our staff. Thank you.
Trustee Quinn.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I think one of the most eye-opening things that I learned as a new trustee was the amount of money that our board spends on covering for absenteeism in the board. And I'm asking the superintendent if this policy is working, this procedure is working. Is it lowering absenteeism? Is it supporting employees in getting to work? And is there more we could do? Thank you.
Superintendent.
Thank you. Through you, one of the challenges with our current situation and absences is not the attendance support program, but the plan design. And this isn't anything new. We've certainly talked about that changing from what our old sick leave regime was, that had some finite numbers to it, to what is a very, very rich absence plan of 11 sick days, 121 short-term disability days, which gets renewed on an annual basis. That's the challenge, and the reason why certainly absences are starting to increase provincially has to do with, again, a very rich plan and some handcuffs that have been put on through bargaining on what we can do about it. And for example, we used to be able to, as a board, request a doctor's note at any time for an absence, and certainly we would choose when we would do that. But now, under the current central terms, we can't ask for a doctor's note from a teacher until after 5 working days. So there are things that have been built into the current sick leave plan regime that have come in centrally that have somewhat handcuffed us in terms of how we approach absenteeism. Thank you.
Trustee Carabella?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. And how many people do we have in the step 3? I mean, it has the step 1 assessment meeting, step 2, and step 3. Do we have many employees in the step 3 process? And just kind of getting a time frame of how much time are they given between step 1 to step 3?
Thank you. We currently do not have any employees in step 3. We have many in step 1 and step 2.
So that's like, to follow up, is that, we have how many employees? 3,000 teachers? Is that like 10% or how many?
I wouldn't have that information here, but we certainly, again, the process is such that we work on trying to change behavior and try to improve attendance, and we generally have some success with that. In some cases, an individual their attendance may get worse, but sometimes that's someone going on LTD or sick leave, and they tend to be more complicated when you're getting to those kinds of levels. But as I said, currently we don't have anyone in step 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Quinn?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, how many staff are employed by our board to implement this program and to speak with staff and to work them through these processes, to support them to get back to work and to avoid absenteeism? Because the investment, I think, in that may pay dividends in attendance and the cost related.
Thank you. And again, through the chair, we have one attendance support officer. That individual does the bulk of the work on that. They are supported with a support staff person, a clerical support staff person, and then within human resources, all of the administrators have a role to play. So Sumita certainly would have a role to play, as would Laura Fries, as would Darlene, as would I. So, but the bulk of the monitoring and the contact would be done by our attendance support officer. Thank you.
Trustee Quinn?
Through you, Mr. Chair. On a given day, how many employees in our board are absent for any specific reason? Do we know a general sense of what the average employee absentee rate is per day?
We have a report that would be coming forward at a future board meeting. I believe it's in a couple of weeks, we will be bringing that information. Again, that's coming soon. In terms of any given day, every time is different. Every day is different. We currently, at this time of year, would have fairly low absenteeism, which is always the case in September. And then what happens is it does tend to start creeping up, again, moving into November. And then we certainly experienced last year some significant increases in absenteeism in April, May, and early June. Thank you.
Director Dawson?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to add to what Superintendent O'Hara said, it depends on the time of year. There's trends and also days of the week.
Trustee Quinn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking to sort of quantify the daily costs on average of absenteeism to the board. So we could say it's such a problem that our board spends X thousands of dollars out of our budget on replacement staff in cases where they need to be replaced on a daily basis. So if it was 11 or 15 average absences per day across the board, that would translate to X thousands of dollars per day that we're spending on absenteeism. And I think that might drill it down to the general public to understand what those real costs are when someone can't make it into the office, and perhaps help us with the message that attendance isn't about being, making sure that people show up, but it actually has a cost to our board that affects the money we're able to spend on kids across the province, or across our board.
I believe that was in a benefits presentation earlier this year or late last year. Who can handle that? Superintendent?
Thank you, and through you. There has been certainly discussions on the costs of absenteeism and the sick leave plan, and those information did come through budget. And I know that Superintendent Nagoy has spoken to that and the true costs and the impact on the board's budget. So there is information that's been mined on that and presented.
A couple of questions that I had are on these themes as well. So monitoring of attendance. Superintendent O'Hara, you said that there's a presentation coming up in a couple of weeks, a summary of statistics. I know we get annual statistics. And then the other question was related to the tracking of costs of absenteeism. I know that in that benefits presentation it was referred to, there was a piece of software that was discussed, and there was a target of reducing absenteeism costs by $1 million a year. So you also referred to the challenge in the plan design and the regime change that handcuffed us. Are you referring to the implementation of that software and the missing of that target of $1 million to reduce costs?
Again, through you, no, I'm not talking about that particular presentation, which was a presentation that was put on through SBCI, and there's a certain amount of that they were providing us with information on absences, and the other side of it was, to be frank, an attempt to try to sell more of their product to us. So there was a little bit of a sales pitch that took place at that. We do our work in-house, and that's why we have an attendance support officer. Thank you.
Okay. And with regards to the monitoring, can you describe what brings forth the monitoring report on attendance statistics? Is that just something that your department does on an annual basis in camera, or do we get that at public meetings on an annual basis?
Again, through you, they're brought in camera, and we bring that report 3 times a year.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or discussion on attendance support program? Okay, so let's move on to item 5.3, mobile, Administrative Procedure 6-45, mobile cellular device operating procedure. Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's been some minor updates and clarification throughout the procedure. We clarified that IT determines regularly the standard issued devices based on the market options, pricing, and integration with the current systems. We clarified the role both of the board and the users of these devices, outlined the tracking of devices in case they are lost or stolen, and also the eligibility for an upgrade at 2 years if required, and at 3 years if it hasn't occurred within that time frame, just to ensure that they are still meeting the needs of the roles within our board and the technology advancements. And I'd be happy to take any questions trustees may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer Nguyen. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to item 5.4, Administrative Procedure 6-03, School Procedures Sectional Allocations. Superintendent Overholt.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The procedure that we have before you, will be rescinding. Last year, we brought forward 2 policies that related to this procedure related to staffing. As you can see, it is quite dated. September 1992 was the last time it was, looked at. And since then, as you are well aware, many different regulations in regards to staffing has taken place. So it is out of date, does not apply to the processes, and it is ministry mandated in regards to staffing and allocations of those. We do have specific processes in place with our secondary staff as to how section allocations do take place, so procedure will be rescinded accordingly.
Thank you. Any questions? Trustee Quinn.
I just note who the approval was by, and it was the person for whom this building is named in 1992, so that's an old policy, I suppose.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent. I think you're on deck for the next 2 items as well. 5.5, the work plans, what we've completed and what's in the pipeline.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just the first document you have is last year's working plan, the policies. That gives you a detailed outline of all the policies that we did go through and what specifically we did with them. So we did go over 43 policies last year, either reviewed, revised, or rescinded throughout the year. So certainly went through quite a few policies, and we are on track to meet our 3-year cycle that we have put in place. The next document is the 2017-2018 policies that we plan to bring forward throughout this school year. Answer any questions that anyone would have.
Any questions about the work plan? I think that's pretty good. 30, how many policies? 43. 43. Wow. I didn't. Any questions? Thank you, Superintendent. Upcoming?
Just the last item on miscellaneous is just the policy working group that we do have a few new members, but again, as we go through each year, we certainly make sure that we have a good transition where we have some committee members that were on the committee the previous years, and we add some new ones so that transition and succession plan continues on from year to year. In regards to, next policies, I think it is on that working plan. that is presented to you. I don't have it right in front of me.
Through you, Mr. Chair, are these policy working group members, I recognize a number of principals' names, are there other staff members on the policy group?
Through you, Mr. Chair, they're either principals or vice principals.
Anyone else? Terrific, thank you. Okay, I see no new business. I see no absences. So may I have a motion to adjourn? Trustee Marai, seconded by Trustee Carabella. All in favor? I see no one opposed. And may I ask Trustee Yantomasi for a closing prayer, please? Thanks.
If you join me in the sign of our faith, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Thank you, Lord, for your presence with us this day. As we depart from this space now, we ask you to bless us throughout the remainder of the day and guide us safely home. Do not let the learning and conversations of this gathering die, but instead, may they continue to ruminate within us and bear fruit in our responsibilities throughout the year until we find ourselves together again. Please also give strength and comfort to all those affected by natural disasters throughout the world, especially in areas left homeless and destitute due to recent hurricanes. We ask this in the name of Jesus and in the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. In the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.